Chapter 3. Life Before Television. We listened to the radio on Sundays. Father Coughlin spoke about politics, unions, banks, and other current topics, with a few racial slurs thrown in. It was the racist remarks that was his undoing. Cardinal Mooney had to let him go. Father Coughlin was such a powerful speaker and spoke without fear about his convictions. Whether I agreed with him or not, I admired him greatly. Unfortunately, he stepped on too many toes of people in powerful places, and we heard from him no more. When I was quite young, we listened to another exciting speaker on the radio, Monsignor Fulton Sheen. He gave truly dynamic and inspiring talks. As a young boy, I enjoyed hearing his many examples that he used to make a point. There was always a clear message to his talks. Both he and Father Coughlin influenced me a lot to someday want to speak up publicly and tell people my views on current issues. Perhaps in those early years of my life, a seed was planted within me. At the time, I really was not thinking that strongly about being a priest, but it was a recurring thought that emerged every so often. I can still hear the voice of Monsignor Sheen, later Bishop Sheen, in my memory. Of course, the favorite programs for me as a child were The Lone Ranger, Superman, Flash Gordon, The Inner Sanctum, The Green Hornet, and several others. When I say that we prayed together, it was not by force. My parents never said, "All right, everybody, on your knees, we're going to pray." No, what they did was much more powerful. They simply gave us example. Both parents knelt down every evening to say the rosary along with the radio station at 7:15 p.m. They never said anything, but watching them was like being drawn by magnetism. We automatically fell to our knees. Besides, it was something beautiful we were doing together. The atmosphere in the home was quite religious. There were holy pictures and statues of saints in every room. It became part of life to talk about God, the church, good morals, and proper behavior. My mother, being a very strong woman, even argued with her favorite saints. If we came home from school and saw the statue of St. Joseph or St. Anthony turned around facing the wall, we knew right away it was going to be a rough day for everyone. The statue and my mother's disposition remained on the negative side until the saint granted her prayer. Thank God she got her prayers answered quite soon. As strong a woman as she was, she had a childlike faith. Some of it rubbed off on all of us. My siblings can attest to that. We also shared a lot of laughs. I don't think I ever got through a meal without laughing about something someone said or did. We were not saints by any means. We argued, fought, and played tricks on each other. We were ordinary kids. I thought my mother was the best cook in the world. I know that is quite typical of children to say that. However, I loved everything she made. Our usual meal consisted of Lebanese food. The only thing I did not like then, and still do not like to this day, are mushrooms. When I was a child, they somehow reminded me of something that was distasteful or ugly. I still brushed them aside as if they were a poison. My favorite food was, and still is, the universally accepted principal dish in the Middle East, kibbe. I would prefer it before the most perfectly prepared steak. Strangely enough, although I am wild about all Lebanese dishes, I also love spaghetti, which is also near to the top of my list of most desirable foods. When it comes to pasta, I probably speak for most kids everywhere. As a young child, I did not understand anything at all about matters concerning birth. I had no idea how a baby came into this world. When I was about 6 years old, my mother was pregnant for the last time with my youngest sister, Jackie. Since my mother had so many children before both of us, she simply remained on the heavy side. Naturally, I did not presume she was carrying my sister because there was no actual difference in my mother's appearance, with or without pregnancy. No one told me anything about such things as how babies were born or where they came from or how they got here. All I knew was that people go to the hospital when they are about to have a baby and they come back with one. In my young mind, it was all quite very simple. Mom and Dad go to the hospital, they see a lot of babies, they pick one out that looks good enough to take home. They bring it home and make it part of the family. It has to be so. Look at all the kids Mom and Dad got. They must have been well known at the hospital. Maybe got first choice. The first death that affected me deeply was my grandmother's. My mother's mother, Catherine Fadul, was about 79 when she passed on. I had no idea what it was all about. In those days, it was fashionable, at least among our people, to put the deceased in the home for a wake service before burial. My grandmother looked like she was sleeping. My mind was filled with confusion and wonder when I saw my older sister Marie yelling at Grandma to wake up. She even grabbed the body and lifted her almost out of the casket. I didn't know if that was part of what grown-ups call a wake service, during which someone tries to wake up the dead person, or perhaps it was something personal in which Marie couldn't bear to have Grandma die. I discovered we are all going to die someday. That was a real shocker. I was sure glad when my mother explained to me that we are going to live even after our bodies die. Not only that, we are all going to be together again in heaven with God. For many years I had a strong dislike for motorcycles. I never wanted to ride one, and I didn't even like them on the road. Then one day, one of my sisters mentioned that I was hit by a motorcycle when I was in the first grade. Then everything came back to me. I remember every detail of what happened. I was crossing Mount Elliott Street. I looked both ways, no cars. I began to cross the street, then suddenly a motorcycle came from behind me. He did not stop and was moving pretty fast around the corner. Before I could react and move out of the way, the handlebar, at a perfect level with my neck, struck me hard, just under my skull from behind. I actually remember being airborne. People who witnessed it said I was thrown about 20 feet. I must have passed out upon hitting the pavement. Neither the family nor the doctors knew if and when I would awaken. I'm not sure how long I had lain there. I opened my eyes to see my parents and others surrounding the table. I had no idea how I got in the hospital, and I certainly didn't remember anyone taking my clothes off and putting a simple hospital gown on me. From the way I was treated, it was obvious that they were very happy to see me alive and awake, and no broken bones. As a matter of fact, there were no other apparent injuries. Lawsuits were not popular at that time. I recovered completely without a lawsuit. When I got back to school after missing a few days, I was as good as new. But the thought was still with me, that as a child I had my first brush with death. I learned two things from that incident and from others as I was growing up. Life is very fragile, and we only die when we are supposed to, regardless of the circumstances. Since we lived in the city, I was not familiar at all with life on a farm. We were invited to a farm one day. It belonged to one of our relatives. It was fun getting that close to animals. I was asked if I wanted to milk a cow. I could see firsthand where milk comes from. I agreed to try it. The first time I sat down to begin milking, the tail of the cow swished across my face. It was like getting slapped. I said, "I don't think this cow wants to get milked. Do you have any other ones?" They smiled. Then they convinced me that I misunderstood what was happening. The cow was probably just brushing flies off her back and legs. So I tried again. This time I was really excited. I actually succeeded in getting a half a pail from the cow. For me, it was like a real accomplishment. I not only discovered where milk came from, but with a hands-on experience, I got some. My memory of that experience is still vivid, after some 60 years. I also haven't forgotten the huge difference between the air on the farm and the air in the city. The smell of manure on the farm was very strong. Probably the scariest moment in my childhood was coming home from a movie with my brother after seeing a Frankenstein movie. It was starting to get dark. Every time we passed an alley, I imagined a monster waiting there for us to do us harm. I wanted to run all the way home, but I remembered that there were several alleys along the way, and monsters love to chase little boys. My brother kept reassuring me that we were safe. That helped a lot. In the summer of '36, my mother and I were going to Grand Rapids to visit my Aunt Minnie. one of my mother's sisters, and her husband, Uncle Alex. I especially looked forward to spending much of the summer with their two boys about my age. We had a lot of fun together. The beach at Grand Haven was not far from there, and going to the beach was definitely a part of the visit. We were all packed and nearly ready to take the train to Grand Rapids. At the last minute, my mother said we were not going. I asked why. She never answered my question. She simply said we were not going, and that was final. I pouted, got very upset, and was deeply disappointed. For a young boy to travel that far in those days was like going to another country. When my mother said no to something, she rarely changed her mind. Our whole family can testify to that. Little did I know what would follow. The next day we heard on the radio that that very train we were going to take to Grand Rapids, Michigan, was derailed. Many were injured. It seemed that some boys, as a prank, had put some stones or boulders on the tracks to see if the train would crush them. The locomotive went off the track and the passenger cars went with it. We were spared. My mother then said to me, "That is why we didn't go." That day I marveled at my mother's ability to know what was going to happen. What I called spooky, I found out later, was called premonition. Chapter 4. A Vision Shared by 4 Children. The next memorable event in my life is absolutely true, as is everything else. What I am about to relate was truly a blessing beyond words. I shall forever consider myself blessed for having such an experience. I will not exaggerate a single detail. This is exactly as it happened. It was 1937, and I was 7 years old. It was a holy day, according to the church calendar. We called the Feast of the Ascension of Jesus into Heaven. That meant no school. The 4 of us, my sisters Rose and Elizabeth, called Billy, my brother Tony, and myself, were all upstairs in the apartment above the store owned by my parents. On this particular morning, both parents were busy working in the grocery store. I don't recall what each of us was doing. We were certainly not watching television, as many kids do today, mainly because TV was not invented yet. At least it was not yet on the market. I believe my sister Rose was watching over our baby sister Jackie. My sister Billy suddenly cried out, "Look what's going on at the cemetery!" She made it sound exciting. We all dashed to the window, and we all saw the same thing. We were having a vision. We looked across the street in the area of Mount Elliott Cemetery. We could hardly believe our eyes. We were watching thousands, perhaps millions, of oval-shaped objects going up in the sky and millions of others going down into the earth. It was impossible to count them all. This was not a split-second occurrence. The vision lasted for almost an hour. That's what we estimated when it was all over. It was late morning, a beautiful bright day. I remember looking on the sidewalk. I saw no one, and there were no cars in sight. We did not have to convince each other as to what we saw. We simply pointed out different things, and we all knew immediately what it was in the vision. The oval-shaped globes of light were very, very clear. There were 2 things I remember about them. There was a light emanating from within, and they were in soft pastel colors. Among the various objects of light were full-body images as well. Some were in standing positions, descending or ascending. Others were prostrate, as if sleeping. We were constantly expressing the usual exclamations like, "Wow, oh my God, Holy Toledo," and many other appropriate to the moment. For at least 10 minutes, I began staring at a particular cross. It began descending from as high as I could possibly see. It was coming straight down in the area closest to us, just inside the cemetery fence. It came down very slowly. Perhaps it took about 10 minutes before it reached the ground. It was about 3 or 4 feet in height. Only a few inches of it went into the ground. The rest remained standing upright. I could now see it very clearly. There were thorns encircling the vertical bar and crossbar of the cross. I was so fascinated by that cross that I left the window and started to go downstairs. My sister Rose yelled, "Where are you going?" "To get that cross," I said. "I think it belongs to me." "You can't touch those things. They are holy, and you will get punished if you try to grab that cross," she insisted. She scared me sufficiently. I returned to the window overlooking the cemetery. Then we noticed three huge images. In the center of the vision, behind the objects ascending and descending, was a most beautiful lady dressed in blue and white. She took up a third of the entire sky. On her left was a man with a beard. He was holding a child in the palm of his hand. He also took up a third of the sky. On her right was a massive cross with a body on it, filling the rest of the sky. The lady in the center seemed to be in charge of all that was going on. The whole scene was spectacular. I was only a child, but I knew that we were experiencing something very rare. Even as a child, I was very observant. From my earliest days in grade school, I found myself drawing pictures in pencil of my teachers, classmates, or some object in the classroom. No wonder I suddenly began to do oil painting as an adult. I could visualize the scene at the cemetery today as if it was all happening all over again. It was so vivid and remarkable that my memory will never forget even the details of the vision. For many years, I was hoping that I would come to an understanding of what we saw as children. Since what happened was actually a mystical experience not given to many people, there would have to be an important message, either for us or for the world. But that was not to be. In fact, there really was no follow-up to what we saw. When this incredibly marvelous scene suddenly vanished after nearly an hour, we all felt free to go downstairs and tell our parents all about it. We were really excited, and we all wanted to talk at once. I will always be grateful to my parents for listening to us and not calling us very imaginative kids who made things up. We explained everything we had seen to them. We asked if any customers said anything about what was taking place at the cemetery just across the street. My father, taking out his pocket watch, remarked in amazement, "By golly, I don't remember a single customer coming in the store for the last hour. That has never happened before." My mother, a religious woman as she was, responded with great insight. "Well, it is Ascension Thursday, the day on which Jesus ascended into heaven. Maybe that's why it happened today." We were delighted. We were not challenged, rejected, or laughed at by our own parents. What a wonderful affirmation. However, when we told our peers at school about it, we were met with doubt or laughter at best. Even our relatives weren't supportive. So we did what the most natural thing in the world to do. We kept our mouths shut. I didn't talk about it for years. Naturally, in the back of my mind, I knew there was a reason why the vision took place. Its meaning would have to come in the future. Not long after the mysterious vision, we moved across the street from the store and bought another store, better situated and with greater possibilities. My parents did the same thing on a larger scale. They not only bought the store, but also an apartment complex, which took up almost half of the block. As before, we lived directly above the store. We even had back stairs that connected our apartment to the store. I enjoyed being together with the family in the store and then eating together. There was no question about the importance of family values in my life. I always loved to visit my grandfather. We would talk a lot. I loved him dearly. There was something, however, about him I could never understand. Grandpa, we called him Jiddu, which is grandpa in Arabic, and I would get a couple of chairs and sit in the store near the entrance. It was a rather open area. We used a barrel upside down for a table. On it we played checkers. It was fun playing with my 90-year-old Jiddu. There was only one problem. My grandfather could not stand to lose at checkers, especially to be beaten by a 9-year-old. This is an absolute truth. Whenever he was losing, he would say in Arabic, "Who is that coming in the store?" I would turn around and say that it's Mr. So-and-so. Getting back to the game, I would immediately notice the whole checkerboard had changed. Somehow, Grandpa now had the advantage. The first time this happened, I was confused. I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But time after time, it was the same thing. If I happened to be winning, all of a sudden I would hear, "Did you drop something on the floor?" Or, "Was your dad calling you?" "I think your mother wanted to see you for a moment." There was always that same result. I always came back to the game only to lose. So I simply said to myself that I had a grandfather who could not handle losing. I was only a child, but I went along with the program. I never challenged the ceremony of the changing of the checkerboard. I loved him anyway. I loved spending the time with him regardless of the outcome. In fact, down deep I felt good about making him happy. To this day, I have only happy memories of my grandfather. Maybe that's where I learned to say so often as an adult, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. Enjoy the game. Have fun. I have said those very words many times to teams just before a game at the parish where I was assigned. I meant it. Whether those youngsters won or lost, the whole school was very proud of them for having done their best. That's all that one could ask. I had a very good memory in those days, but sometimes I let some important things slip my mind. How quickly I forgot the wonderful blessings God continually gave me. Having been born to such a dedicated, loving, and religious family and gifted with the mystical experience, I was surprised at my behavior at times. My brother Tony and I were alone one day in the apartment above the store. We dared to go down into our parents' bedroom. This was off limits, verboten. But our sense of curiosity got the best of us. We looked at different family pictures hanging on the wall. We couldn't help noticing the big mirror and dresser women used to make themselves look pretty, and various items we had never seen before. Then I saw a statue of St. Anthony I had never seen before. I noticed that on top of St. Anthony's head was a circle of hair that to me appeared very humorous. So I started to make fun of the funny-looking haircut on the statue. In the middle of one of my silly remarks, the head of the statue suddenly fell to the floor. My brother and I looked at each other breathless for a moment, since we were nowhere near the statue. We were about 5 feet away. I said in defense, it must have been an old statue, ready to fall apart anyway. I picked up the head of the statue and, looking at it closely, changed my mind completely. The statue was obviously new. Also, there was a strong wire that ran from the head down through the body of the statue, thereby securing it against any possibility of the head coming off. I was shocked. I turned to my brother. Oh boy, I think I'm in trouble. There's no way this head could have come off without hitting it with a hammer or a baseball bat. It's wired in. Tony scared me when he said God might punish me for making fun of one of his saints. I believed him, but I thought, I'll probably get clobbered more by my mother when she finds out. We came up with a plan. We would glue the head back on. No one would notice the difference. My plan also fell apart like the statue. The next day, my mother called us both together and led us into her bedroom. All right, who did it? I couldn't figure out how she noticed such a perfect glue job. Well, we found out that the statue of St. Anthony was indeed newly bought. There wasn't a single scratch on it. I guess some of the small chips of white showed under the paint where the head and body had separated. My mother's keen eye picked it up right away. I was ready to get punished, first by my mother and then by God. I came up with my only defense. I did not touch it, but I did cause it, and I'm sorry. I got a good strong lecture. There was no punishment, only shame for making fun of something others hold sacred. I promised never to make fun of saints again. I asked if God will punish me. She said, no, you have learned your lesson. Years later, I found out that the circle of hair on the statue is called a tonsure. Seminarians receive it when they become members of the clergy. 2 years before I became ordained to the priesthood, I too was tonsured. Instead of the hair shaped into a circle, they cut 5 pieces of hair in the form of a cross. It indicates a commitment to be a disciple and minister of Christ. I certainly did learn a lesson. In my work, I have met persons of practically every denomination. I have made it a point to respect each person's belief and practice of their faith, regardless of how strange it may appear. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next reading of Father J. Samonie's book.